understand play patterns. So tonight, we're going to talk about how to set up play patterns and how to set up play with your child. And really, a lot of parents, teachers, all want to better understand how they can get their child playing and how they can engage their child with another child. And a lot of times when I go into preschools and consult to very typical preschools, this is exactly what I help them understand is some kids, you can just throw some blocks in front of them and they will just naturally come up with what to do with them. Some kids need a lot more breaking down and scaffolding to be able to build the patterns and to kind of coordinate their play with another child. So as we talked about 2 times ago, was around nonverbal referencing and kind of reading the situation and reading the other person and knowing how to adapt to their actions. Last week, we talked about how to coordinate and synchronize your actions with other kids. Now we talk about how we play with other kids and how we as parents, and then what I also do with teachers, how we can set up that play so that we can facilitate play to be more reciprocal and more interactive with a sibling or with a play date. So a lot of times, previous to this pandemic, a lot of times this talk is around how to set up play dates. Now for this pandemic, it is more how to set this up for you and your child or for your child and their siblings. And it's really, again, like these same slides I just roll through every time. Play can be very static. You can have your child with Magna-Tiles and they can make the same castle 20 times. Or what we're trying to do is push and evolve flexible thinking and helping them think about play in a flexible way and an evolutionary way so that they're noticing minor differences within their play partner, sibling, a parent, or a play partner, noticing minor differences, adapting and evolving their play according to that. So every single video that I'm showing you tonight is less about the object that the child and the parent or the child and the child are playing with, and much more about how the child is noticing the pattern that is being created and how they're evolving their actions, their language, and their play within the pattern that is being created. So it's really around the building that flexible thinking within play. And since a lot of kids with social challenges have an underconnectivity with that information processing and the dynamic thinking, we have to help them build that. And that is a lot of the reason why play doesn't always come naturally for kids. And the tip of the iceberg is truly the social challenge. The below the underlying issues are this pizza pie that I show every time. The underlying issues are that you throw blocks in front of a child and they have motor planning issues or they have visual spatial issues. And so they don't know how to visually spatially set up the blocks, or they have attentional issues and they get super distracted so they can't keep the pattern going. So all of that is why we want to break down play and create patterns and then allow patterns to evolve. And essentially what we're trying to do is scaffold our interaction so that the areas that are difficult for our child, we're going to scaffold and accommodate for these areas so that when we're getting into play, we're not taxing their difficulties because we want to highlight the social interaction. And if there's a ton of language or there's a ton of motor planning or there's a ton of visual spatial building, we're taxing the wrong areas. When our intention is social interaction, when you have a play date over and your intention is to connect your child with a play date, then we don't want to tax the areas that are hard for our kids, and we want to bolster those areas so that then we can really highlight the social interaction. So what we want to do is essentially create a dance. And the way that every dance is created is through patterning. And every play scenario, if you look at it kind of, you like comb through, you do the forest for the trees type thing, and you look at the details within the play, every single play interaction starts with a pattern. You sift through the sandbox and you find the two kids that are playing and actually engaged in playing. There is a pattern. One has the dump truck, one has the shovel. They're dumping the sand into the dump truck and driving the dump truck, dumping the sand over here, driving the dump truck back, putting more sand in. That's the pattern. Essentially, there's like 3 patterns in life that you could build every single play interaction off of. That we call like a sender receiver interaction, where you're sending some sand, the dump truck receives it, goes and does something, comes back, send more. Giver, putter, same type of thing. You give it, he puts it, you come back, you give, you put. These are patterns that you can take any single interaction and build a pattern within it. I'm doing some one-to-one sessions with parents over Zoom that are just kind of working on this play interaction. And basically, I'll get on a Zoom and I'll see the child, like today, this little child was playing with those, I call them fuse beads, but everyone else calls them something else. I forget what they're called, but some other kind of beads. They're like, have a hole in the middle. And he was just like lining them up, kind of doing a very thick static play with them. And I saw on the ground that they had a cement truck mixer, plastic mixer thing. And I was like, all right, our intention is to socially engage this child with his mom. So let's create a pattern. I see a dump truck. He's playing with these beads. Let's create a pattern. So the pattern became he puts the beads in the cement mixer truck. Mom sat on the other side of the hallway and he sent the cement mixer with the beads to mom. She dumped out the beads, sent it back to him. He put more beads in. She sent it back to him. That may seem incredibly simplistic, but for this child, that was much more of a push on his dynamic thinking than just lining up the beads by colors or just messing with the beads and like doing a sensory feel of the beads. That was creating a pattern. And then the amazing part was we continued to evolve that pattern. So what you want to do is essentially create a pattern and then create productive uncertainty. Because once that pattern gets embedded for that child, then he can do the pattern without thinking. And that's not what we want. To create a thoughtful, engaged, dynamic process throughout our play. So we always want to be one step ahead of the child, because that's creating that dynamic thinking and that dynamic problem solving. So then what the mom did was, there was like so many evolutions to it, but then she moved around. So she would dump out the beads, send it back to him, and then move to another room. So he had to figure out, I need to put the beads in the car, and then I look up and I assume mom's going to be right in front of me, but no, now I have to adapt my actions and adapt the truck and send it to her over this direction. Then we got marbles and beads, and mom had to choose. Mom told him, I want marbles, I want beads, and that he did not like because he did not want to share his marbles. But that was the flexible thinking moment in that, is that he then had to be flexible and share his marbles, and then mom would send him back to him at a certain point too. I want to show this next video is essentially the same type of thing, very, very beginning stages. And this child is very young. This is the same pattern I would use with an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, that I am working on this dynamic thought process around social engagement and trying to elongate out their stamina for an engaged play scenario. And this does not look like play. This is not essentially play. It's an interaction. Not all play. I think what I want to challenge is what play is. Play does not mean a parent needs to entertain their child. Play means we are engaging a child in our thought process and allowing them to build their perspective taking of what we're thinking about and adapting their actions according to that. So thinking back to the co-regulation piece. So this little guy, what our intention is for him to remain engaged in the interaction. And what mom and dad are doing is becoming the unpredictable one. So we start at a very simplistic level of, he was playing with these Unifix cubes, which fine motor wise, he cannot stack them. So we decided to just move them around the room and build a pattern of dad gives it to the little boy has to hand it over to mom. And what you watch for is not what color the Unifix cube is, because that's about the product and we're going for the process of the play. What you watch for is the moment he notices a tiny little difference and adapts his actions to that. That is what we're going for with every social interaction that we have with our kids, is that they notice a moment that we've created flexible thinking in, and that they have to adapt their actions according to that.
Oh, mommy.
So he can get very distracted. And so we're trying to not use language because we're trying to get him to think and problem solve.
Are you? Whoa! I see one.
So that the mom moved a tiny bit. My office is very small for this reason. We couldn't do this in a gym because he would get way too distracted. So we're just teaching him the pattern. We're not expecting a ton out of him.
Curve.
We're just wanting him to follow our lead and follow the guided participation of the parents. So watch this. He goes back to where mom should have been and then changes his actions.
Blink.
So what's amazing to me about that, like I could watch that 4,000 times, and I have anyways, is his ability to stick with it. Because he, at that time, he's older now, he was an incredibly distractible kid and incredibly self-directed. And to keep, that is like running a 5K for him. It takes that much muscle strength to keep engaged and not get focused on, he could turn that Unifix cube into the solar system and go off in his own little amazing ideas. And the fact that we could keep him thinking about us and moving his body and regulating his body to the plan of his parents is truly like a muscle strengthening activity for him. And that's the simplest of where you start with this type of interaction. The next video I'm going to show you is, there's two pieces to it. And this is just to show the importance of patterns. So it's two little guys I do a really simplistic dyad with, and both of them don't have a lot of language. And this first video I'm showing you is if I just put out toys and I don't set up a pattern. And this is in the same time frame, same session. I just put out toys and I let them play. And what I want you to watch is their engagement level, essentially when toys are out, but I don't set up a pattern for them. So essentially, they looked fine, and maybe at preschool they would look okay, but there was zero engagement or noticing of each other and zero dance in that. There was no, they could have played like that for an hour, and I could have sent them out to their moms and been like, oh, they did great. But they would have not have, if I asked one kid what the other kid did, no idea, doesn't matter. They were so individually focused, yet playing in the same area. Next video, I set up a pattern for them. They were interested in these Unifix cubes, and there was a farm out. So again, we go into a pattern of, okay, kid X is going to put the Unifix cube in a truck, send it to kid Y, and the kid Y is going to feed the farmhouse or whatever. Like, it doesn't even matter, because the toys are the background. They are just the pattern setters. The foreground is the interaction and the dance you're creating between the two kids. So my pattern was, blonde-haired child puts the Unifix cube in the truck, so he's the putter, and the darker-haired child is the giver. He puts the Unifix cube in as the giver, and then the darker-haired child puts the Unifix cube in the farmhouse. So we kind of created this story of, oh, the animals are hungry in the farmhouse. And then watch how first they're understanding the pattern and then they start to have fun with it.
Farmhouse. Okay, more food for the farmhouse. Nice.
And I do a little sing song so they don't get distracted by language.
Oh, delivery. Oh no. More food.
So watch them dance with each other, that they have to wait each other out.
Oh no. Oh, delivery. You guys are a good team. Oh, delivery. Get the train ready. Nice. Add some food. Oh. Add some food. Here's some more food. Oh, delivery. Oh! Oh!
So all that could go on forever. And so what we then do is start to add variations to it and to start to evolve it. But what I think is so important about that, especially the juxtaposition of just throwing toys out there and setting up a pattern. Now, sometimes kids can set up patterns on their own. There are many kids that can do that. Kids that are seeing me, that is a difficulty for them. So what I want to do is help them, first and foremost, help them see that sharing an experience with another child can be so fun and doesn't have to be so frustrating and doesn't have to be so confusing of like, what am I doing? What are they doing? They're stealing my pieces. The more we give kids roles, the more they become independent. And that play, which those two kids, either one of their parents would have been like, oh my God, I have to facilitate every second with them. They did it. They were doing it by themselves. They got the pattern and they kept it going and they knew what their role was. So then maybe we evolve it and make the cow come and eat the food or the farmer delivers it or whatever. It really is about setting up the pattern. So this is a video of one of my coworkers and her son, and he's like, I don't know, probably 2.5 in this video. And it's really about setting up a pattern that's at the child's capable, competent level and setting it up so the pattern, the roles are connected in some way. So this is like a fish puzzle or something. And so yes, a puzzle can be very, very independent. But if our goal is setting up a social interaction, let's make that puzzle more reciprocal. And so they take turns with who does what piece of the puzzle.
We're gonna do a puzzle together. I'll take a turn and then you'll take a turn. Are you ready? You want me to get the whale? I got him. Can you catch him? Thank you. Okay, Kaden, can you get the shark? You got the shark. Let me catch him. Whoop. Thank you.
So then you want to do nonverbals like that where Katie just put her hand out and he hands her the piece so he starts to understand the back and forth turn taking.
Yes, nice catch.
So that can be, that's like the turn. So when I was talking about the different types of patterns, there's the giver, putter, sender, receiver. That's like the simplest turn taking. But instead of making it about the puzzle or about the game, you have to highlight the interaction with it and highlight the back and forth reciprocity of it. And instead of Katie focusing on which animal or giving him the prompts of it's mommy's turn, you go back to our talk 2 times ago, which was about she just put out her hand and gave that nonverbal cue of, you need to give it to me. So it's a lot of the problem solving of getting our kids to think about what their job is within, again, we talk a lot about the 50-50 interaction and reciprocal interaction. You think about how to get your kids to do 50% of the interaction. This, literally we did a couple hours ago. And my kids were playing with those pull and pop toy tube things. And so it was, I think this one is water or marble. It's the same idea, but it's all about noticeable differences and all about the dance. The dance can happen in any way. And this is essentially synchronizing your actions together. So I was sending them water, and we had to move the water from tube to tube to tube. And what's the social interaction within that is, you have to think about where your tube is and how you need to modify your plan for where the other person's tube is. So if my tube's over here, but Julia's sending it to me, it's like catching a ball. I have to modify and adapt my actions to be to where her tube is. So again, the pattern is set up by me saying, okay, we're gonna send this through the tubes, and everyone has to do their part of the interaction. And you see where I notice sometimes that theirs isn't gonna work, but I'm not gonna tell them, I'm gonna have them problem solve, like, oh, notice where your tube is or whatever.
Okay, this time we're gonna go the opposite way. I'm gonna send a marble to Julia. Julia's gonna send it to Marin, and Marin, you're gonna send it back to me. Well, then we'll have to, let's see how many times we can go around, okay?
So they have to really problem solve and adapt.
Are you gonna be able to test it? Oh, no. Yeah, think about what you're doing.
So she had to think about that she had totally forgotten the other side of her tube.
Hard when you're floating. Oh, Marin, think about your other end. Think about your other end. Is it there?
So again, it's like the silliest activity, but it's trying to build in flexible thinking and the engagement.
Oh, faster.
And then add in little variations of faster, slower to keep them dynamically thinking about it.
Okay, watch this. Switch directions. Ready?
And there with the marble. This is the same type thing with water. You could do this, like the marble, we do it a ton of times at Fuse with paper towel holders and sending marbles around the entire class, or Hot Wheel cars can go through paper towels. This just happens to be what we were doing at the moment.
Make sure to zoom in.
AKA get me out of the video. So that's like changing a little bit so that she has to adapt her tube to me.
Okay, let's try.
So you could do that with anything. Kids love, honestly, balls through tubes. So you get a paper towel holder, you get toilet paper rods. What's great is, like, if you get a rug that has that really long tube, or like PVC piping, my teachers will create like gumball factories where one child is at the top of the tube, one child's at the bottom, and you have to do like a ready, set, go, and you send it down the tube. And it's so much perspective taking and thoughtful processing. And again, you've created the pattern of, I'm gonna send it to you, you're gonna catch it, you're gonna put it in the basket. And when you have all the gumballs, now we have to switch it and you have to send them to me. So it's just creating this super simple pattern that then you evolve it into great imaginary play. This is more Fuse videos, but very much what you can do with siblings or play dates in sometime in the future. So we have these like big blue blocks things, but you can do it with small blocks. It doesn't really matter what you do it with. Is again, they have roles, and one child is going to bring the big blue block and the other child is going to be the builder. So when we think about dynamic thought process and dynamic social problem solving, when you have two roles and those roles are connected, inherently you're building the kid's dynamic thinking process, because the child who's bringing over the block doesn't actually get to decide where it's built, what is built. The child who's building doesn't get to decide which block is being brought over. So they're having to evolve their thinking constantly. So when you have your kids playing at home, you have Magna-Tiles, you just gather all the pillows in the house and you give them roles, it inherently makes them be 50-50 players. And there's always in every family, like the more leadership or bossy, however we would like to spin it, child. And then there's the one that always kind of acquiesces and compensates. But if you give kids 50-50 roles, that leader type child is only going to get to stick with their role. And the child who always acquiesces, we're building up to say, hey, you get your idea in this. So if you put all the pillows in the room and someone is the deliverer, they get to deliver whatever pillow they want, and the builder gets to make the fort. And then you're always going to switch that role so that everyone has to keep their thought process thinking at the same time.
It goes right here. That's where the ice skating pots. Looks like Dylan's ready. Two more pieces for me. Yep, 2 more pieces.
So they know ahead of time that they're going to switch roles.
Be a robot.
And what we talk about with our kids is you have to think out loud so that the friend knows what you're thinking, because when the roles switch, they have to think about what you're thinking about.
1 more piece.
And again, it's still a dance because the builder guy is waiting for Dylan and he has to be patient. It's a ton of inhibiting your impulses too, because he could easily run over to that bin and grab a block, but he knows there's roles and he has to stick with his role.
I'm not sure what that is. That's from another class, I think. All right, are you guys ready to switch jobs? Okay, Billy, or Dylan, you're the builder now. And Billy, you're the passer.
So what I want to show you in the next video is how you start simple with a pattern and then it can get bigger and more complex. So the pattern we're teaching these kids is sender, receiver, balls. One child is going to send the ball to the other child and then they're going to put it in the bin. And we start really simply and then we evolve it into a whole class project or a whole class play scenario. So that's where you want to start with your kids at home, is really start from a simple level of, I'm going to hand you, we're going to just play me and you blocks of, I'm going to hand you a block and you're going to be the builder. And then we're going to bring your sibling into it. It may be too hard for some kids to do too many people at one time, but if you start really simple, help them understand the pattern and embed the pattern, then it can evolve into a more complex type scenario.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, quick, 7.
Now it's a whole class works together. And people, they know if they're the deliverer or the thrower in.
Good job, guys. Oh, pick all the small ones. Dylan's ready. He's waiting.
So the next video kind of is the next level of now you add, so you begin with patterns and then you evolve patterns. And then you start, as I said a little while ago, you start to add language into it of how to get, this is when it moves from like simple co-regulating building patterns and thinking about patterns into more of collaborative type play is when language is added into it. So many times our kids talk before they play, and then play becomes this talking process rather than this playing process. And dancing always has to start with connection, like almost physical body connections and noticing differences. And then you can talk about it. But if you go into blocks and you just start talking about what you're making, you're not really building anything. And you're certainly, until you understand the process, you're not thinking about the other person. So we really get kids connected with their bodies and then build in language. So this is after these kids, again, we still give them roles, and now they're talking about what they're building. And we really encourage them to always talk about what they're thinking and talk about what their plan is. So we talk a lot about the group plan, which I'm going to talk about in a second, but talk about what your plan is and how it builds into the group plan. So you'll hear these two kids starting to evolve into more of that collaborative type play. So one is the giver and one is the builder. They call it like parts department.
And the other one, the little one goes in the middle.
So it looks like they're just collaboratively building, but they have jobs so that they don't crash their ideas or crash their words.
No, you're not picking the people. This one now. Yes. Really tough. Yeah, it is going to be really tough. One at a time, Billy. Here you go, Cuba. Take your bridge down. Take your bridge down.
So again, it takes a lot of problem solving.
Matt,
You're gonna.
if you notice something, you could tell Cuba.
So that little boy is noticing something is wrong, but he's waiting for the teacher to fix it, and she's not going to fix it.
That's not the right. How would I find that? We're gonna build another level, guys. So we might have to. Well, John's telling you something about what you guys are making. We can't. We are not building another level yet. We're not making another level yet. I need to get one more to John. Oh, Billy, we ran out. Anything but not on. What else can you use, Billy? That's the same size. How about these? Let's try it. How about you put that piece right here? And do you like this? How about let's put one more on top? We're not making another level. Billy, I think that's a smart idea. Okay, that one. The bridge, the cars look like. So tell him what you think. I think it's good. Okay. I think that. So I notice it looks different than what John and Billy are building. I wonder if they expect it to look the same. How about what number one? How about another? And then get another. Cooper knocked it down. I think it's another one. This can be weighted. Oh, Billy, that really worked. But Cooper knocked it down and he said this can be avoided. So tell him what you're expecting it to look like. I'm expecting it to not look like that. Kuba, look at this. Remember you built level 1? Let's go. Oh,
So, I mean, that could go on and on, but essentially, I want to see if, so essentially what we're trying to get the kids to understand is their own individual idea versus what the group plan is. And that is really difficult for a lot of our kids. And as we start to build play plans and build play patterns, they're starting to understand that I have my idea, you have your idea, and we have to create this group idea. And that happens with the beginning of kind of the play patterns and thinking about how my idea melds with another child's idea. And then we start to talk about the group plan. So you saw a lot in that video around what Maddie's idea was versus what Kuba was building, and how we tried to get them to talk to each other about not what your child did wrong, but what my idea is and how it's different from what you're seeing or what you're thinking. So a lot of times we'll use whiteboards to draw stick figures with bubble thoughts in it of like, okay, Maddie, what were you thinking? And he may say, well, my idea was a 2-level. And then Kuba will say, well, I was thinking a 1-level. And so then we can get them to collaborate. But what we want to start with is these really simplistic play patterns, so that what the beauty of that is the evolution of, they started at the beginning of that school year with just play patterns and just 2 kids, 7 blocks. I hand you a block, you make a tower. I hand you a block, you make a tower. So they appreciate the process of how to create a play pattern, how to evolve a play pattern. And then you bring the language into it, which is the really tricky part, because then that becomes the collaboration, and that becomes essentially the group plan versus my own individual plan. And there's lots of ways to brainstorm and troubleshoot the group plan versus an individual plan. But that, my goal is really to emphasize how it starts with the play pattern, so that they understand from a level of, okay, when you're the builder, that's going to be your plan. And when you're the designer, essentially, or the parts giver, that's going to be your plan. So it's delineating to kids that not everybody is thinking about my plan. 9 times out of 10, if a child comes into my office and I have blocks out and I say, okay, what are you thinking about building? They're going to be like, a castle, a ship, whatever. And then I will say, oh, I'm thinking about something so different than that. First, they probably might not ask, because if they ask, then they may have to do my idea. But then even if they do ask and I say, I was really thinking about making a road or something like that, they'll start building. And then I'll be like, wait a minute, let's pause. What are we making? And they'll be like, a castle. And I'm like, but my idea was a road. And it takes the stopping the thought and thinking about how to integrate my idea into their idea. But that's almost because we've moved up 10 levels, rather than if I just go in and say, hey, we're going to build something right now, and I'm going to hand pieces to you and you're going to build, and then halfway through you're going to hand pieces to me and I'm going to continue building it. We then are starting that stair-step process of how to understand the co-regulation, which precedes the collaboration. And then that child will come back into the play and join me in the play rather than try to take over the play. So a lot of our kids, we talked about in different nights of like, oh, my kid's just barrels into play and doesn't really think before they start playing. One, that's executive functioning, which is like next week's talk. But the other piece of that is they're not looking for the patterns. And if you're not looking for the patterns and appreciating how you join a dance, then you're awkwardly jumping in and taking over someone's dance partner. Whereas if you watch, notice, okay, it looks like they're all playing, they're all building a tower and taking turns. Or I noticed that friend's handing blocks to this person and they're putting it on. Then you can walk up to that play and join in, because very rarely, seldomly, do kids join play by saying, hi, can I play? They actually notice and join. That is the typical way of playing. Our kids are taught to ask to play. But then what happens is then you say yes, and then they don't know what to do. So they're still going to impale that play and change it, or say, well, I wanted to make pirate ships, and the kids are already making a big train road. So we have to get them to think about how to join in a dance pattern essentially, and then evolve their thinking from their own individual idea of what they wanted to do into the group dance idea of how they can join a play and seamlessly enter without taking over that play. Because inevitably kids no one wants to come in and get their play taken over. But if you understand the pattern and you understand how to join, it will inevitably, you can add your idea in and it doesn't seem abrupt or bossy or whatever. It seems like you're just taking a turn rather than taking the play over altogether. So that's more about the group plan. So that was kind of, I mean, it's a simplistic process, but it's also, I think, a really important concept. And I think all of my teachers, now when we talk about play and when we start play at the beginning of the year, they start with play patterns. They do not start with, okay, I'm going to teach a kid how to play blocks. I'm going to teach a kid how to play Legos. It doesn't matter, because if you're choosing toys that are at the child's appropriate level, they know how to play with them. And then you really are teaching children how to understand, appreciate, and enjoy play patterns, and how to understand what their role is. And very importantly, for more self-directed kids, how to stick with their role and be flexible with the process of their role and how it may evolve. And then being able to flip roles or having roles evolve, so that then when you go outside and you see kids running, you're going to know that, okay, my pattern right now is synchronized running. But then when every kid picks up a stick and they evolve that into, let's go fight the butterflies, you know the pattern is still running. So now you know this is just a twist, and I can pick up the stick and keep running with it. A lot of what we talk about with our kids is, once we teach them the pattern, is really about same but different. Patterns can be incredibly similar, but what you're doing is seeing that noticeable difference. So like when I was doing the water through the tube for my daughters in the pool, the tiny noticeable difference was I moved the tube up really tall. So my daughter had to adapt her actions to move her tube up really tall. If we were doing like another pattern of, I do this a lot with kids, like Hot Wheels cars, and someone's a sprayer and someone's a washer. So we'll do like a spray, 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 and then I'll send it to them, and then they'll do the dry, dry, dry. The noticeable difference might be that I start sending cards faster and faster. So they then have to, again, going back to the co-regulation, they have to adapt their actions and they have to go faster, or then there's going to be this big backup, and then it's still silly, but they have to adapt. Oh, she's going faster. Or then if I slow down, they're going to wait, and they're going to either say, hey, send me some more cars, or they're going to wait me out. And that's the dance of, I know my pattern, I know the role, but it can evolve. And maybe the next day we wash babies and we spray the baby and give them a bath, and then they dry the baby. So you can use the same but different, but add the evolutions and the variations, so that then you're working on that dynamic thought process at the same time as you're working on that social interaction and teaching children how that they can enjoy play and they can adapt to their actions to it. So that's kind of that. Questions you guys have around that, or thoughts of, even what I love to do is, if you say, okay, my child loves this, then I can make up a pattern. Like this family that I was on a Zoom with today, they were saying how their child has all of a sudden randomly become really into the globe, which is random. So I was like, oh, that's great. So let's print out pictures, 2 pictures of every continent. And the pattern is, you put one picture on one side of the room and one picture on the other side of the room, and you spin the globe, point to a continent, you both go and grab a picture, and then you bring it back to the globe. So the pattern is, we're going to take turns pointing to a continent, and then we're going to synchronize our actions, go get the 2 pictures of the globe and bring it back to the globe. Or you could do a sender receiver, and I hand you a picture of the continent, you go match it to the picture on the globe, like whatever. It doesn't, again, the object is the background, the foreground is the pattern and the interaction you're creating.